These cloisters in Norwich Cathedral are so beautiful and so peaceful that it's hard to realise that this beauty and this peace were created in the wake of fire and violence. In 1272, the long-running feud between the people of Norwich and the prior and monks of the cathedral burst out so bitterly that the monks sealed themselves in here like a fortress, while the people of Norwich catapulted barrels of burning pitch from the tower of a nearby church, setting the whole cathedral and the monastic buildings ablaze. At the time, it was a disaster, but as things turned out, the result was a triumph. The old wooden roofs had burnt like tinder, and it was decided to build the new cloister roof in stone. The work here was to take 150 years, and it was by great good fortune that at that time East Anglia was the home to outstanding artists and craftsmen whose skills flowered in illuminated manuscripts, in stained glass, in wood and in stone.
Perhaps flowered is an appropriate word. The vaulting of this roof looks for all the world like the interlacing branches of a forest. And here, on the earliest of the roof bosses to be carved, are, if not the flowers of the forest, a profusion of leaves. There's hawthorn, maple, vine leaves and grapes, and the leaves and acorns of sturdy English oak. And then, suddenly, among the leaves there are faces. At first they peer out warily from the foliage. Then they emerge more boldly. One of them pokes out his tongue in a gesture of defiance. It's as though the old pagan green men of the woods and forests are invading the cathedral. They bring the beasts with them. A dragon lurks among the leaves and tastes an acorn. Lions stalk the forest. Now dragons emerge boldly from the hawthorn leaves and feed on the berries. Their presence seems a threat. But now, unexpectedly, another presence is seen among the leaves. Christ, the true vine. Emerging from the leaves, Christ is shown not in triumph, but in defeat, stripped and flogged before his crucifixion. Vine leaves are scattered on the soldier's clothing. There are grapes in the background. Christ redeems all nature and brings back into harmony the wild things of the forest. In the next boss, the leaves are curled back to show Christ carrying his cross. Behind him, a soldier holds the 3 heavy-headed spikes which will nail Christ to the cross. Here, Christ is crucified. Leaves frame the scene. He wears the crown of thorns. The Virgin Mary mourns beneath the cross, and St. John, his gospel clasped to his chest, stands at the other side. One of the spikes the soldier carried is now thrust through Christ's feet, pinning them together. And Christ is crucified not on dead wood, but on living oak that thrusts out leaves from its base. Leaves form the background of the resurrection boss, where Christ bursts out of the tomb. A soldier reels back in amazement, and 2 Telemons, hairy, bare-headed wild men, brace their shoulders against the rib's groin and support the tomb. And now, the harrowing of hell, where Christ treads Satan under his feet and releases Adam and Eve and all those held in limbo awaiting Christ's redemptive power. Christ, triumphant, thrusts his cross-staff into Satan, shown as a monstrous toad, his hands and feet tied together. Christ grasps Adam by his wrist. Eve is beside him, her hands clasped in prayer. The prophets follow them. all are naked, perilously vulnerable in the gnashing jaws of hell. A golden chain which Christ has snapped hangs from hell-mouth, shown as the sharp-toothed jaws of a great monster of the deep, Leviathan, blue of hue and fierce of eye. Behind Christ's now damaged head is an oak leaf, the last vestige of the leaves of the forest in this walk.
These bosses were carved in the early 1300s, and as far as we know, they are the first bosses anywhere in the world to tell a series of stories that unfold in sequence. Having invented the idea, Norwich brought it to perfection. There are 400 bosses here in the cloisters. Most of them are storytelling. The number alone is without parallel, but that's just the beginning. When in 1463 the roof of the nave was struck by lightning and devoured by fire, the masons were poised for something special. They gave the nave a stone vault with more than 250 bosses on which were carved from east to west the story of the creation to the Last Judgment. It's not just the concept and the artistry that are astonishing, it's the sheer physical labour that went into them. The purpose of these bosses, first and foremost, is structural. They are keystones that lock the ribs of the vaulting into place. That means that they have to be lowered into position from above, and that means in turn that the carving often can't be completed until they're in place. A main ridge boss like this would take about 2 weeks to carve. And remember that a working week wasn't 5 8-hour days, but all the daylight hours of 6 days. Pay was good. A 14th century mason was paid 4 shillings, 20 new pence a week. A barber only got 2pence, and a master mason's yearly perks of a furred gown, tunic and gloves was worth another 5 weeks' wages. We know that John Horne, a stone carver, was paid 4 shillings a week for 15 weeks in 1427, and William Reps was paid 6 and 8pence for carving each of 6 bosses in the North Walk about the same time. They were local men, but not all their work was local. The lantern of Ely Cathedral's West Tower was built by Robert Woodhurst, a mason who worked in the cloisters. And the Ely Octagon is the work of John Atwood and John Ramsay, both Norwich men. Norwich men did adventurous and inventive work in many different parts of the country, but it was here in their native city where their imagination first flowered and these amazing bosses were carved. Where did the ideas for the bosses come from? From books, certainly. There was a wealth of manuscripts produced in East Anglia and throughout the country. This illustration of the flagellation from the Luttrell Psalter finds an echo in this cloister boss, and the boss of Christ carrying his cross could also have come from an illuminated manuscript. The records tell us that in 1346, when this West Walk was being built, a history of the Apocalypse was bought for use in carving the bosses. The interesting thing is that a third of the bosses on the Apocalypse had already been carved. Perhaps the manuscript from which the sculptors worked had become too thumb-marked for further use. This manuscript from Trinity College, Cambridge, shows what the Norwich book may have looked like. It shows the second angel sounding his trumpet, at the sound of which a third of all ships are destroyed.
And here's the same scene in stone. The angel blows a trumpet fit to crack his cheeks above a great mountain burning with fire, which is cast into a sea of blood. a woman clings to the prow of a sinking ship, while her companions look on in terror. This is one of the ships that will survive, but its passengers hang on grimly as the blood-red sea threatens to engulf it.
In the 13th and 14th centuries, the Apocalypse, the revelation of St. John the Divine, was often used by the Christian to chart the progress of his soul, guided by St. John, through the hazards of this world to the heavenly Jerusalem. Its popularity can be judged by the fact that of the 400 bosses in the cloisters, nearly a quarter, that is 90, are devoted to the subject of the Apocalypse.
This boss of the war in heaven, where angels with swords subdue dragon-like devils, was being carved in 1415, when King Henry V was fighting the Battle of Agincourt with his band of brothers on the other side of the Channel. Englishmen would surely have had no hesitation about identifying St. Michael, thrusting his spear into the winged dragon Satan, with God for Harry, England and St. George.
Norfolk people had a special interest in the battle. The archers at Agincourt, who were so instrumental in the victory, were commanded by a local knight, Sir Thomas Erpingham.
It was he who built this gateway, leading into the cathedral close to celebrate that famous victory.
But there are other scenes in these cloister bosses that don't come from Scripture.
Did the mason's imagination provide these lively images? There are men fighting beasts, men fighting each other, one on horseback, one mounted on a lion.
And then there is that recurring theme in art and literature in the Middle Ages of man fighting woman.
High above a window, two people are locked in conflict. A closer look shows this may be a housewife who's caught a thief stealing her linen. Her right arm's been broken off, but it was obviously raised to fetch him a swinging blow. The struggling thief, stripped to the waist, has one foot planted on the board and the other thrust against the woman's breast. He's tugging at a cloth with one hand while she grabs his hair. He holds another cloth out of reach above his head as he struggles to get free. Nothing daunted, the woman hangs on grimly. At this precise point in the conflict, he is grimacing with pain, while she smiles with some satisfaction at her ascendancy.
This boss has just been cleaned, and it's exciting to see the difference it has made to this 14th century slice of life.
And another fascinating domestic conflict is taking place just round the corner.
Two women are sitting on their husbands' backs. Both of them are wearing fool's caps, and the one on the left is brandishing a truncheon that seems to be made of basket work. She looks as though she's in her Sunday best, with a rich gold collar. And behind her, strange to see, there are once more the leaves of the forest, oak leaves painted gold. The other woman has a truncheon too. Are they trying to hit each other or their husbands? Face thrust close to face, one man pulls the other's beard, and they glower menacingly. In the background, musicians play serenely on pipe and sackbut. Could the idea for this scene, too, have come from an illuminated manuscript?
This particular scene could illustrate a fairground game, but there are other conflicts in deadly earnest. Perhaps the fact that there are so many of them was there to remind the monks that married bliss, which they had forsworn, was somewhat overrated. The married life of Herod was also not a bed of roses. He had married his dead brother's wife, Herodias. This was against Jewish law, and John the Baptist had denounced him. Herod had put John in prison, but dared not execute him. Herodias, however, took her revenge on the occasion of Herod's birthday. A banquet was spread, and Herodias' daughter Salome danced so enticingly before Herod that he offered her anything she wished, up to half his kingdom. Her mother told her, "Tell Herod that you want the head of John the Baptist served on a salver." The whole story is told here in one boss. And it's a marvelous example of 3 moments in time frozen in one piece of sculpture.
The first moment shows Herod and Herodias feasting. The boss is only about 18 inches across, but the detail is astonishing. The mason has carved plates and food, salt cellars and bone-handled knives, even though at 12 foot above the ground they could barely have been visible to the monks below. Herod is magnificent in his gold crown and chain, though his clothes are more likely to have been found at the English court when the boss was carved than in the Middle East 1,000 years earlier. Herodias, too, is dressed in the height of fashion. No crown for her, but a simple golden circlet. And the mason has thrown a delicate veil of stone over her hair and carved a gold net that holds it in bunches at either side. Their guests, who are feasting at a side table, are also in 15th century dress. Some of them have lost their heads, but it's still possible to see knives and food on the table. A server stands ready beside the queen, and there's a serving table on the king's right. Behind the royal couple, 2 devils gesture hideously. And in front of them, Salome dances, bending over backwards until her headdress touches the ground. On the left of the same boss, the second scene takes place. Here, John the Baptist is in prison, about to be beheaded. His jailers stand on either side of him. One of them, his head missing, holds John by the shoulder. The other clutches him by the hair and raises his arm, now broken, which must once have wielded a sword. John kneels in prayer between them. In the third scene, Salome, her wish granted, triumphantly holds John's head aloft on its dish. And as though to make the final comment on this remarkable boss from the stone itself, a monkey peers over the server's shoulder.
The beheading of John the Baptist is shown again on the opposite side of the cloisters.
Perhaps an illustration like this one from the Luttrell Psalter was its inspiration.
John is being dragged from his prison, a kind of Gothic dog kennel. The sword looks deadly sharp as it's poised to sweep down, round and up, severing John's neck from below. The carving is so detailed you can see men's faces on the gold armour on the soldier's knees and gold armour clasps on his shoulders. And behind him, once more, there are the leaves of the forest.
It's amazing that these bosses have survived in such good condition, especially since they have often been the targets of deliberate vandalism.
The wear and tear of 600 years have taken their toll, and so have some of the attempts at restoration. 50 years ago, the bosses in these cloisters were repaired and repainted and finished with a coat of wax which kept the damp out, but also held the moisture in, and further damage occurred. Today there is a restoration program which will take many years to complete and costs over £250,000.
Craftsmen using traditional techniques are repainting and regilding the bosses. Gold size and gold leaf are used for the gilding as they were nearly 700 years ago. The vaulting is being lime-washed in traditional colours, as it would have been when the building was new.
It is an act of faith, both in fundraising and in skills, as massive as that faced by Bishop Salmon and Prior de Lakenham, when the roof of the cloisters had been burnt in the riots.
This may well be Bishop Salmon supporting the arch of a book cupboard. This is the young and beardless King Edward II. And here, an unknown jester who seems to have been rather squeezed out in the later building operations.
This doorway is one of the marvels of medieval sculpture. It is called tabernacle work, and the figures are carved out of the same piece of stone as the mouldings.
Christ, enthroned, sits in judgment at the centre. But he is a compassionate and not an avenging judge. His broken right hand must have been stretched out in blessing, and with his left hand he shows his wounded side. On one side, an angel holds the spear that made those wounds, and perhaps his winding sheet. On the other, an angel displays the cross, now broken, and part of the crown of thorns. Edmund, the martyred king of East Anglia, shares the glory, and the Danish archer who slew him is trodden underfoot. On the far side, John the Baptist is easy to recognize in his rough coat of camel hair, his executioner beneath his feet. Opposite him, Moses descends from Mount Sinai, carrying the 10 Commandments written on tablets of stone. This is probably St. Peter, his keys missing, but still holding the church, a building that looks remarkably like Norwich Cathedral.
This doorway is an end and a beginning. On this side is the first series of storytelling bosses anywhere in the world. Beyond are the roof bosses of Norwich Cathedral nave, which tell the epic story of the history of the world, from creation to doomsday.